Now, as 1,200 migrants cross the Channel this weekend, are we in a state of national emergency? Well, this number for the year is at 42% on the year previously. And now new predictions show that up to 50,000 could cross the Channel this year as we head into the summer. That would be an all-time record. It's astonishing. It looks like we simply cannot stop the boats and we cannot smash the gangs. I'm joined in the studio now by the Director of the Centre for Migration Control, Rob Bates. Rob, welcome to the show. Pleasure as ever to have your company. So, this new analysis out this morning, done by The Times newspaper, predicting 50,000 this year. How did they come to such an astonishing number?
So it's not their own methodology. It's not the methodology that belongs to The Times. It is actually internal mechanisms that the Home Office has actually used in previous years to actually project
so
going
valid
forward.
Projections?
It is absolutely a valid projection. I would actually argue that it probably is underselling the scale of the crisis that we face later this year. It's not a question of if we hit 50,000, I don't think. I think it's a question of when, and I could well see us exceeding that number a lot earlier than we perhaps expect. And this is, of course, because Keir Starmer came in with a bold plan that he was going to smash the gangs. He was going to completely distance himself from the Tories' policy of stopping the boats and instead focus on those people smugglers. But where has that got us? We're now seeing record levels, as you've just said, 42% up on this time last year. And the real question is now, where does the Labour Party go? Keir Starmer looks like he's run out of road with this policy. He's got no more rabbits to pull out of hats. He's got no more cards up his sleeve. I think, frankly, this is going to be a Labour Prime Minister that we're going to see over the next 4 years flailing around, unable to address this problem. And it's painful to see. For anyone that loves this country, no one wants to see tens of thousands of men coming across the Channel invading our country every single year.
I think, Rob Bates, irrespective now of your political leanings, I think people just see this as unsustainable. Take the racism out of it, just put it down to the pressure on British infrastructure, the pressure we found out the weekend, £1 billion a month is now being spent on benefits for those coming from overseas, legally and illegally. But this is the most high profile, the most visible, the most clearly wrong method of entry into the UK. A bit of tough talking from the Conservatives today about what they plan to do about it. First from the Home Secretary, for the shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, saying it's time to, if you like, wage a bit of a war on the French.
Well, look, I've never bought into the idea that we need to be cooperating with the French. I think they've been taking us for a ride over the last two governments, frankly, since 2018 and since we voted to leave the European Union. They've been looking to kind of get one over on us. And look at where we are now. We've handed them £500 million to stop the boats. We've basically surrendered our fishing waters for another 12 years. And what are we really getting in exchange? Absolutely nothing. They're sending these chaps over that are setting up camps in Calais and saying, right, sayonara, off you go to Britain. You're no longer our problem. And the idea that we can only solve this problem through European collaboration is completely pie-in-the-sky thinking. It is absolutely not the way to solve this. We solve this by sending an incredibly clear message to anyone looking around the world, whether that's in France, Africa or Asia, looking to come into Britain, break into Britain. If you come here, you will be deported. No ifs, no buts. And the problem with the system at the moment is, of course, once these individuals arrive in the country, they're scattered around the country. Accommodation costing us, billions of pounds every single year. What we need to be doing is detaining them and removing them within 2 weeks. We need to be setting those stretching targets for ourselves. That's the only way we send a message to those looking to come across.
And Joe, one of those startling figures I worked out over the weekend myself, when you look at that £1 billion, look at those pictures there on the French beaches there, gendarmes, literally just sat round having a chinwag. They're having a chinwag by their Jeep. They're not doing anything to intervene. And as I keep saying, Rob Bates, these illegal immigrants there, they're up into water no deeper than a bath, the shallow end of a pool. They could easily be stopped, and they're not. The point I was going to make, that figure of £1 billion a month in benefits for those from overseas, in 6 weeks, that would pay for the entire annual winter fuel allowance for British pensioners. And I put it to you, Rob, that people now are just waking up to this. They can see that this is a violation of our sovereignty, of our borders, of our safety. And the huge question is, when are they going to do anything about it?
Well, we're not going to see anything happen now, I'm sad to say, for the next four years. I don't think we'll see anything until, hopefully, we see a new government in 2029. The £1 billion a month figure is an interesting one because that is something that is predominantly the result of where we've seen our mass migration, legal migration system take us over the last 20 or so years. And we have now basically imported millions of people that are low-skilled, low-wage, and thus having to be supported by the British taxpayer. And the fact that it's foreign nationals as well, not migrants that have received British citizenship, but people that are literally a national of another country that are being bailed out by the British taxpayer is an incredibly insulting figure. Those that get given asylum, those that eventually go through will, of course, in more cases than not, eventually end up claiming universal credit, housing benefit, other kinds of support as well.
The French proposed at one point no benefits for foreign arrivals for 5 years. I suspect that goes down very well with British taxpayers.
Yeah, well, I don't think that goes far enough, to be perfectly honest. I think we need to get towards a system where the means through which those individuals are able to claim benefits, which is indefinite leave to remain, is just completely scrapped. It's been something that has been far too much taken advantage of over the last few years. It really is a sort of status, a quasi-legal status that serves no clear purpose as far as I can decipher. And what it really does do is just effectively allow those that have come into the country and made no real economic contribution to just live a life of luxury at the expense of the British taxpayer. So it needs to go.
Rob Bates, always a pleasure to have your company. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio today in Westminster. That is, of course, the Director of the Centre for Migration Control, Rob Bates. Meanwhile, the UK was not among a group of 9 countries demanding reform of the ECHR, despite its Law Chief Lord Hermer calling for Britain to lead efforts for that change. Well, let's speak now with the human rights lawyer David Hay. David, welcome to the show. A pleasure to have your company. What a surprise. Our chief lawmaker says we should reform from within, but then doesn't sign this letter signed by 9 other nations. And David, I know you're an expert on the forlorn prospect of trying to reform the ECHR from within. Tell us why you think that kind of approach is a wasted endeavour.
Good afternoon, Martin. Well, I think, we've just heard the Prime Minister's press conference where he was saying he was working with his partners, presumably meaning European ones. Well, that's 9 that he wasn't working with because they're not part of that letter. And it seems that the 9, for instance, Denmark, Italy, Belgium even wrote, obviously, saying that we need to have a grown-up conversation about reform of the ECHR. But as we know, we were not part of that. And we also know that they've said that they will not, Labour will not leave the ECHR. So we've got a bit of a problem.
And the fact of the matter is, if you try and reform from within, a bit like the European Union, then every single member state has to agree to any form of change. And with the ECHR, the notion that we could say, hey, I'll tell you what, lads, we'd like to modify the ECHR. We don't want to leave it, but we'd like to modify it to make Britain a special case. That's for the birds.
I think, Martin, you've got a point there. I think the problem that you've got is that when you look at it, every single country that's in the ECHR, you would imagine would want control of their borders, would be able to deport foreign criminals. That's something which the 9 that signed that letter and ourselves are actually experiencing now. We're experiencing those problems. But perhaps the fact that only 9 of the whole of the members of the ECHR, which I think is about 46, signed that, shows you why haven't they signed that? Why are not other people wanting to change that? And I hate to say this, but the reality is, unless we reform that or leave, we are not going to be able to get control of our borders, and we'll have human rights used against us by the people, the very bad people in this world, who are effectively using our good ethics and human rights against ourselves. And that's one of the big problems that you're seeing here.
Can I get your reaction to what happened at the tail end of last week, where it was announced by the Lord, the learned Lord, that it was akin to Nazi Germany to want to leave the ECHR?
I mean, that was, I know Lord Herman. He worked for me on a case. He is an intelligent person. But what that shows, that I found frightening for several reasons, but particularly this is the government's chief legal advisor making such a schoolboy error and showing lack of judgment. That is very worrying in someone in that position that's got a very, very, very important position, perhaps the most important lawyer in the country, making such a gaffe. It's very disappointing, and I think a little bit terrifying as well, if this is the person in charge of all the very substantial legal problems, for instance, the ECHR and reform, that we face over the coming years. A lot more than just a foolish mistake, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. And I wonder, actually, if the learned Lord was speaking the quiet part out loud. I wonder how many people in the top echelons of the British legal institution actually agree with him. Now, the kind of Gary Lineker position, if you disagree with any of this, then you are a de facto fascist. I wonder if that's a deeper running river. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. That's the human rights lawyer, David Hay. Always, again, looking dapper as ever. Thank you very, very much.